It normally is, but this backslash that I deliberately put before this period here is an escape character. It is a way of telling re.search that I don't want any character there. I literally want a period there. And it's the only way you can distinguish one from the other. If I got rid of that slash, this would mean that the email address just has to end with any character, then an E, then a D, then a U. I don't want that. I want literally a period, then the E, then the D, then the U. This is actually common convention in programming and technology in general. If you and I decide on a convention whereby we're using some character on the keyboard to mean something special, invariably we create a future problem for ourselves when we want to literally use that same character. And so the solution in general to that problem is to somehow escape the character so that it's clear to the computer that it's not that special symbol, it's literally the symbol it sees.
So we don't need another slash before the dollar sign?
No, because in this case, $sign means something special. Per this chart here, $sign by itself does not mean US dollars or currency. It literally means match the end of the string. If, however, I wanted the user to literally type in a $sign at the end of their input, the solution would be the same. I would put a backslash before the $sign, which means my email address would have to be something like malin@harvard.edu $sign, which is obviously not correct too. So backslashes just allow you to tell the computer to not treat those symbols specially, like meaning something special, but to treat them literally instead. How about one other question here on regular expressions?
You said one represents to make it one plus. Then you said one was to make it one with nothing.
Sure. So let me rewind in time. I think what you're referring to was one of our earlier versions that initially looked like this, which just meant 0 or more characters, then an @sign, then 0 or more other characters. We then evolved that to be this, dot plus on both sides, which means 1 or more characters on the left, then an @sign, then 1 or more characters on the right. And if I'm interpreting your question correctly, one of the points I made earlier was that if you didn't use plus or forgot that it exists, you could equivalently achieve the exact same result with 2 dots and a star. Because the first dot means any character. It's got to be there. The second dot star means 0 or more other characters. And same on the right. So it's just another way of expressing the same idea. 1 or more can be represented like this with dot dot star. Or you can just use the handier syntax of dot plus, which means the same thing. All right, so I dare say there's still some problems with the regular expression in this current form, because even though now we're starting to look for the username at the beginning of the string from the user, and we're looking for the .edu literally at the end of the string from the user, those dots are a little too encompassing right now. I am allowed to type in more than the single @sign. Why? Because @ is a character, and dot means any character. So honestly, I can have as many @signs as this thing at the moment as I want. For instance, if I run python and validate.py, malin@harvard.edu still works as expected. But if I also run python and validate.py and incorrectly do malin @ harvard.edu, that should be invalid, but it's considered valid instead. So I think we need to be a little more restrictive when it comes to that dot. And we can't just say, oh, any old character there is fine. We need to be more specific. Well, it turns out that regular expressions also support this syntax. You can use square brackets inside of your pattern. And inside of those square brackets, include 1 or more characters that you want to look for specifically. Alternatively, you can, inside of those square brackets, put a caret symbol, which unfortunately in this context means something completely different from match the start of the string. But this would be the complement operator inside of these square brackets, which means you cannot match any of these characters. So things are about to look even more cryptic now, but that's why we're focusing on regular expressions on their own here. If I don't want to allow any character, which is what a dot is, let me go ahead and I could just say, well, I only want to support A or B's or C's or D's or E's or F's or G's. I could type in the whole alphabet here, plus some numbers to actually include all of the letters that I do want to allow. But honestly, a little simpler would be this. I could use a caret symbol and then an @sign, which has the effect of saying, this is the set of characters that has everything except an @sign. And I can do the same thing over here. Instead of a dot, to the right of the @ sign, I can do open bracket, caret, @ sign. And I admit, things are starting to escalate quickly here, but let's start from the left and go to the right. This caret outside of the square brackets at the very start of my string, as before, means match from the start of the string. And let's jump ahead. The $sign all the way at the end of the regular expression means match at the end of the string. So if we can mentally tick those off as straightforward, let's now focus on everything else in the middle. Well, to the left here, we have new syntax, a square bracket, another caret, an @ sign, and a closed square bracket, and then a plus. The plus means the same thing as always. It means one or more of the things to the left. What is the thing to the left? Well, this is the new syntax. Inside of square brackets here, I have a caret symbol and then an @ sign. That just means any character except an @ sign. It's a weird syntax, but this is how we can express that simple idea. Any character on the keyboard except for an @ sign. And heck, even other characters that aren't physically on your keyboard, but that nonetheless exist. Then we have a literal @ sign. Then we have another one of these same things. Square bracket, caret, @ close bracket, which means any character except an @ sign, then one or more of those things, followed by literally a period edu. So now let me go ahead and do this again. Let me rerun Python of validate.py and test my own email address to make sure I've not made things worse, and we're good. Now let me go ahead and clear my screen and run Python of validate.py again and do mailin @ harvard.edu, crossing my fingers this time, and finally, this now is invalid. Why? I'm allowing myself to have one @ sign in the middle of the user's input, but everything to the left, per this new syntax, cannot be an @ sign. It can be anything but one or more times. And everything to the right of the @ sign can be anything but an @ sign one or more times, followed by, lastly, a literal .edu. So again, the new syntax is quite simply this. Square brackets allow you to specify a set of characters that you literally type out at your keyboard, A, B, C, D, E, F, or the complement, the opposite, the caret symbol, which means not, and then the one or more symbols you want to exclude. Questions now on this syntax here?
So right after @ sign, can we use the curly brackets M1 so that we can only have one repetition of the @ symbol?
Absolutely. So we could do this. Let me go ahead and pull up VS Code and let me delete the current form of a regular expression and go back to where we began, which was just .*@ and .*. I could absolutely do something like this and require that I want at least one of any character here. And then I could do something more to have any more as well. So the curly brace syntax, which we saw on the slide earlier but didn't yet use, absolutely can be used to specify a specific number of characters. But honestly, this is more verbose than is necessary. The best solution, arguably, or the simplest at least ultimately, is just to say .+. But there too, another example of how you can solve the same problem multiple ways. Let me go back to where the regular expression just was and take other questions as well. Questions on the sets of characters or complementing that set?
So can you use that same syntax to say that you don't want a certain character throughout the whole string?
You could. It's going to be, you could absolutely use the same character to exclude you could absolutely use this syntax to exclude a certain character from the entire string, but it would be a little harder right now because we're still requiring .edu at the end. But yes, absolutely. Other questions?
What happens if the user inputs .edu in the beginning of the string?
A good question. What happens if the user types in .edu at the beginning of the screen? Well, let me go back to VS Code here, and let's try to solve this in two different ways. First, let's look at the regular expression and see if we can infer if that's going to be tolerated. Well, according to the current cryptic regular expression, I'm saying that you can have any character except the @ sign. So that would work. I could have the dot for the .edu, but then I have to have an @ sign. So that wouldn't really work, because if I'm just typing in .edu, we're not going to pass that constraint. So now let me try this by running the program. Let me type in just literally .edu. That doesn't work. But, I could do this, .edu @ .edu. That too is invalid. But let me do this, .edu @ something .edu. that passes. So it's starting to get a little weird now. Maybe it's valid, maybe it's not, but I think we'll eventually be more precise too. How about one more question on this regular expression and these complementing of sets?
Can we use another domain name as a string input?
Can you use another domain name? Absolutely. I'm using my own just for the sake of demonstration, but you could absolutely use any domain or top-level domain. And I'm using .edu, which is very US-centric, but this would absolutely work exactly the same for any top-level domain. All right, let me go ahead now and propose that we improve this regular expression further, because if I pull it up again in VS Code here, you'll see that I'm being a little too tolerant still. It turns out that there are certain requirements for someone's username and domain name in an email address. There is an official standard in the world for what an email address can be and what characters can be in it. And this is way too accommodating of all of the characters in the world except for the @ symbol. So let's actually narrow the definition of what we're going to tolerate in usernames, and companies like Gmail could certainly do this as well. Suppose that it's not just that I want to exclude @signs. Suppose that I only want to allow for, say, characters that normally appear in words, like letters of the alphabet A through Z, be it uppercase or lowercase, maybe some numbers, and heck, maybe even an underscore could be allowed too. Well, we can use this same square bracket syntax to specify a set of characters as follows. I could do A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J. Oh my God, this is going to take forever. I'm going to have to type out all 26 letters of the alphabet, both lowercase and uppercase. So let me stop doing that. There's a better way already. If you want to specify within these square brackets a range of letters, you can actually just do a hyphen. If you literally do A hyphen Z in these square brackets, the computer is going to know you mean A through Z. You do not need to type 26 letters of the alphabet. If you want to include uppercase letters as well, you just do the same. No spaces, no commas. You literally just keep typing A through capital Z. So I have little a hyphen little z, big A hyphen big Z. No spaces, no commas, no separators. You just keep specifying those ranges. If I additionally want numbers, I could do 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. Nope, you don't need to type in all 10 decimal digits. You can just say 0 through 9 using a hyphen as well. And if you now want to support underscores as well, which is pretty common in usernames for email addresses, you can literally just type an underscore at the end. Notice that all of these characters are inside of square brackets, which just again means here is a set of characters that I want to allow. I have not used a caret symbol at the beginning of this whole thing because I don't want to complement it with an E, not complement it with an I. I don't want to complement it by making it the opposite. I literally want to accept only these characters. I'm going to go ahead and do the same thing on the right. If I want to require that the domain names similarly come from this set of characters, which admittedly is a little too narrow, but it's familiar for now, so we'll keep it simple. I'm going to go ahead and paste that exact same set of characters over there to the right. And so now it's much more restrictive. Now I'm going to go ahead and run python of validate.py. I'm going to test my own email address, and we're still good. I'm going to clear my screen and run it once more. This time trying to break it, let me go ahead and do something like, how about David_Malin at harvard.edu, enter. But that too is going to be valid. But if I do something completely wrong again, like Malin at harvard.edu, that's still going to be invalid. Why? Because my regular expression currently only allows for a single @ in the middle, because everything to the left must be alphanumeric, alphabetical or numeric, or an underscore, the same thing to the right, followed by the .edu. Now, honestly, this is a regular expression that you might be in the habit of typing in the real world. As cryptic as this might look, this is the world of regular expressions. So you'll get more comfortable with this syntax over time. But thankfully, some of these patterns are so common that there are built-in shortcuts for representing some of the same information. That is to say, you don't have to constantly type out all of the symbols that you want to include, because odds are some other programmer has had the same problem. So built into regular expressions themselves are some additional patterns you can use. And in fact, I can go ahead and get rid of this entire set, A through Z lowercase, A through Z uppercase, 0 through 9, and an underscore, and just replace it with a single \W. \W in this case represents a word character, which is commonly known as a alphanumeric symbol or the underscore as well. I'm going to do the same thing over here. I'm going to highlight the entire set of square brackets, delete it, and replace it with a single \W. And now I feel like we're making progress, because even though it's cryptic, and would have looked way cryptic a little bit ago, and even though it would have looked even more cryptic a little bit ago, now it's at least starting to read a little more friendly. This caret on the left means start matching at the beginning of the string. \W means any word character. The plus means one or more. @ symbol literally. Then another word character, one or more. Then a literal dot, then literally edu, and then match at the very end of the string, and that's it. So there's more of these too, and we won't use them all here, but here is a partial list of the patterns you can use within a regular expression. One, you have \D for any decimal digit. Decimal digit meaning 0 through 9. Commonly done here too is if you want to do the opposite of that, the complement, so to speak, you can do \D, which is anything that's not a decimal digit. So it might be letters and punctuation and other symbols as well. Meanwhile, \S means white space characters, like a single hit of the space, or maybe hitting tab on the keyboard. That's white space. \S is the opposite or complement of that, anything that's not a white space character. \W we've seen, a word character, as well as numbers and the underscore. And if you want the complement or opposite of that, you can use \W to give you everything but a word character. Again, these are just common patterns that so many people were presumably using in yesteryear that it's now baked into the regular expression syntax so that you can more succinctly express your same ideas. Any questions then on this approach here, where we're now using \W to represent my word character?
So what I want to ask about was the actually the previous approach, like the square bracket approach. Could we accept like lists in there?
Yes, we'll see this before long. But suppose you wanted to tolerate not just .edu, but maybe .edu or .com. You could do this. You could introduce parentheses, and then you can OR those together. I could say com or edu. I could also add in something like, in the US, or gov, or net, or anything else, or org, or the like. And each of the vertical bars here means something special. It means or, and the parentheses simply group things together. Formally, you have this syntax here. A or B, A or vertical bar B means A has to match or B has to match, where A and B can be any other patterns you want. In parentheses, you can group those things together. So just like math, you can combine ideas into one phrase and do this thing or the other. And there's other syntax as well that we'll soon see. Other questions on these regular expressions and this syntax here?
What if we put spaces in the expression?
Sure. So if you want spaces in there, you can't use \W alone, because that is only a word character, which is alphabetical, numerical, or the underscore. But you could do this. You could go back to this approach whereby you use square brackets, and you could say A through Z, or A through Z, or 0 through 9, or underscore, or, I'm going to hit the space bar, a single space. You can put a literal space inside of the square brackets, which will allow you then to detect a space. Alternatively, I could still use \W, but I could combine it as follows. I could say, give me a \W or a \S, because recall that \S is white space, so it's even more than a single space. It could be a tab, but by putting those things in parentheses, now you can match either the thing on the left or the thing on the right one or more times. How about one other question on these regular expressions?
Perfect. So I was going to ask, does the \W include a dot? Because no. Okay.
Nope, it only includes letters, numbers, and underscore. That is it.
And I was wondering, you gave an example at the beginning that had spaces, like this is my email, so on. So I don't think our current version, even quite a long while ago, stopped accepting it. Was that because of the caret, or because of something else?
No, the reason I was handling spaces and other English words when I typed out my email address as mailin@harvard.edu was because we were using initially .* or .+, which is any character. And even after that, we said anything except the @ sign, which includes spaces. Only once I started using square brackets and A through Z and 0 through 9 and underscore did we finally get to the point where we would reject white space. And in fact, I can run this here. Let me go into the current version of my code in VS Code, which is using, again, the \W's for word characters. Let me run python of validate.py and incorrectly type in something like, my email address is malin@harvard.edu, period, which has spaces to the left of my username. And that is now invalid because space is not a word character. Yorgo notes, too, that technically I'm not allowing dots. And some of you might be thinking, wait a minute, my Gmail address has a dot in it. That's something we're going to still have to fix. A \W is not the end all here. It's just allowing us to express our previous solution a little more succinctly. Now, one thing we're still not handling quite properly is uppercase versus lowercase. The \W technically does handle lowercase letters and uppercase because it's the exact same thing as that set from before, which had little a through little z and big A through big Z. But watch this. Let me go ahead in my current form run python of validate.py. And just because my caps lock key is down, malin@harvard.edu, shouting my email address, it's going to be OK in terms of the Malin. It's going to be OK in terms of the Harvard because those are matching the \W, which does include lowercase and uppercase. But I'm about to see invalid. Why? Why is malin@harvard.edu invalid when it's in all caps here, even though I'm using \W?
Yeah, so you are asking for the domain.edu in lowercase, and you're typing it in uppercase.
Exactly. I'm typing in my email address in all uppercase, but I'm looking for literally .edu. And as I see you with AirPods and so many of you with headphones, I apologize for yelling into my microphone just now to make this point. But let's see if we can't fix that. Well, if my pattern on line 5 is expecting it to be lowercase, there's actually a few ways I can solve this. One would be something we've seen before. I could just force the user's input to all lowercase. And I could put onto the end of my first line .lower and actually force it all to lowercase. Alternatively, I could do that a little later. Instead of passing in email, I could pass in the lowercase version of email because email addresses should, in fact, be case insensitive. So that would work, too. But there's another mechanism here, which is worth seeing. It turns out that that function before, called re.search, supports, recall, a third argument as well, these so-called flags. And flags are configuration options, typically to a function, that allow you to configure it a little differently. And how might I go about configuring this call to re.search a little bit differently insofar as I'm currently only passing in 2 arguments? Well, it turns out that some of the flags you can pass into this function are these. It turns out that the regular expression library in Python, aka RE, comes with a few built-in variables, so to speak, things that you can think of as constants that have meaning to re.search, and they do so as follows. If you pass in as a flag re.ignore case, what re.search is going to do is ignore the case of the user's input. It can be uppercase, lowercase, a combination thereof. The case is going to be ignored. It will be treated case insensitively. And you can do other things, too, that we won't do here. But if you want to handle the user's input that maybe spans multiple lines, maybe they didn't just type in an email address, but an entire paragraph of text, and you want to match different lines of that text, that is multiple lines, another flag is for re.multi-line for just that, or re.all, whereby you can configure the dot to recognize not just any character except new lines, but any character plus new lines as well. But for now, let me go ahead and just make use of this first one. Let me pass in a third argument to re.search, which is re.ignore case. Let me now rerun the program without clearing my screen, python of validate.py. Let me type in again in all caps, effectively shouting malin@harvard.edu, enter, and now it's considered valid because I'm telling re.search specifically to ignore the case of the input, and that too here is fine. And why might I do this approach rather than call .lower in one of those other locations? If I don't actually want to change the user's input for whatever reason, I can still treat it case insensitively without actually changing the value of that variable itself. All right, any final questions now on this validation of email addresses?
So the pattern is a string, right?
Mm-hmm.
Can we use an F string?
You can. Yes, you can use an F string so that you could plug in, for instance, the value of a variable and pass it into the function. Other questions on this?
\w character, could we take it as an input from the user?
Technically, yes. That's not a problem we're trying to solve right now. We want the user to provide literal input, like their email address, not necessarily a regular expression. But you could imagine building software that asks the user, especially if they're more advanced users, to type in a regular expression for some reason to validate something else against that. And in fact, that's what Google's doing. If you play around with Google Forms and create a form with response validation and select regular expression, Google lets you and I type in our own regular expressions, which would be a perfect example of that. All right, well, let me propose that we try to solve one other problem here, whereby if I go into the same version as before, which is now ignoring case, but I type in one of my other email addresses. Let me go ahead and run python of validate.py, and this time let me type in not mailin@harvard.edu, which I use primarily, but another email address of mine, mailin@cs50.harvard.edu, which forwards to the same. Let me go ahead and hit enter now, and invalid. Even though I'm pretty sure that is, in fact, my email address. Well, let's put our finger on the reason why. Why at the moment is mailin@cs50.harvard.edu being considered invalid, even though I'm pretty sure I send and receive email from that address too? Why might that be?
Because there is a dot that has come after the @ symbol.
Exactly. There's a dot after my CS50, and I'm not expecting any dots there. I'm expecting only, again, word characters, which is A through Z, 0 through 9, and underscore. So I'm going to have to retool here. But how could I go about doing this? Well, it turns out, theoretically, there could be other email addresses, even though they'd be getting a little excessively long. For instance, mailin@something.cs50.harvard.edu, which does not technically exist, but it could. You can have, of course, multiple dots in a domain name like we see here. Wouldn't it be nice if we could handle that as well? Well, let me propose that we modify my regular expression as follows. It turns out that you can group ideas together. And you can not only ask whether or not this pattern matches or this one, using syntax like A vertical bar B, which means either A or B. You can also group things together and then apply some other operator to them as well. In fact, let me go back to VS Code here, and let me propose that if I want to tolerate a subdomain like CS50 that may or may not be there, let me go ahead and change it as follows. I could naively do this. If I want to support subdomains, I could say, well, let's allow for other word characters plus, and then a literal dot. And notice, I'll highlight in blue here what I've just added. Everything else is the same, but I'm now adding room for another sequence of one or more word characters and then a literal dot. So this now, I think, if I rerun python of validate.py, will work for mailin@cs50.harvard.edu, enter. Unfortunately, does anyone see where this is going? Let me rerun python of validate.py and type in, as I keep doing, mailin@harvard.edu, which up until now has kept working despite all of my changes, but now, finally, I've broken my own email address. So logically, what's the solution here? Well, there's a bunch of ways we could solve this. I could maybe start using two regular expressions and support email addresses of the form username@domain.tld or username@subdomain.domain.tld, where TLD just means top-level domain like edu. Or I could maybe just modify this one, because I'd prefer not to have like two regular expressions or one that's twice as big. Why don't I just specify to re.search that part of this pattern is optional? What was the symbol we saw earlier that allows you to specify that the thing before it is technically optional?
The straight bar, we are using the straight bar as optional, make the argument optional.
So we could use a vertical bar and some parentheses and say either there's something here or there's nothing. We could do that in parentheses, but I think there's actually an even easier way.
Actually, is a question mark.
Indeed, question mark. Think back to this summary here of our first set of symbols whereby we had not just dot and star and plus, but also a question mark, which means literally 0 or 1 repetitions, which effectively means optional. It's either there, 1, or it's not, 0. Now, how can I translate to this code here? Well, let me go ahead and surround this part of my pattern with parentheses, which doesn't mean I want literally a parenthesis in the user's input. I just want to group these characters together. And in fact, this now will still work. I've only added parentheses around the new part for the subdomain. Let me run python validate.py. Let me run mailin at cs50.harvard.edu, enter. That's still valid. But to be clear, if I rerun it again for mailin at harvard.edu, that is still invalid. But not if I go in here and say after the parentheses, which now is one logical unit, it's one big group of ideas together, I add a single question mark there. This will now tell re.search that that whole thing in parentheses can either be there once or be there not at all, 0 times. So what does this translate into when I run it? Well, let me go ahead and rerun it with mailin at cs50.harvard.edu so that the subdomain's there. That works as before. Let me clear my screen and run it again. Python validate.py with mailin at harvard.edu, which used to work, then broke. Are we back in business now? We are. That's now valid again. Questions now on this approach where we've used not just the question mark, but the parentheses as well.
Okay, yeah, you said it works for 0 or 1 repetition. What if you have more?
What if you have more? That's OK. That's where you could do star. Star is 0 or more, which gives you all the flexibility in the world.
Yeah, so I was just asking that with question mark, there's only one repetition allowed.
It means 0 or 1 repetition. So it's either not there or it is there. And so that's why this pattern now, if I go back to my code, even though, again, it admittedly looks cryptic, let me highlight everything after the @ sign and before the $sign. This now represents a domain name, like harvard.edu, or a subdomain within the domain name. Why? Well, this part to the right is the same as always. \w+ means something like Harvard or Yale. \.edu means literally .edu. So the new part is this. In parentheses, I have another set of \w+, \dot now, but it's all in parentheses. I'm now having a question mark right after that, which means that whole thing in parentheses either can be there or it can't be there. It's either of those that are acceptable. So a question mark effectively makes something optional. It would not be correct to remove the parentheses, because what would this mean? If I remove the parentheses, that would mean that only this dot is optional, which isn't really what we want to express. I want the subdomain, like CS50, and the additional dot to be what's there or not there. How about one other question on regex is here?
Can I use this for the usernames?
Absolutely. We still have other problems, right? We're not solving all of the problems today just yet, but absolutely. Right now, we are not letting you have a period in your username. And again, some of you with Gmail accounts or other accounts, you probably have not just underscores, numbers, and letters. You might have periods too. Well, we could fix that. Not using question mark here per se, but now that we have these parentheses at our disposal, what I could do is this. I could use parentheses to surround the \w to say any word character, which is the same thing again as a letter or a number or an underscore. But I could also or in, using a vertical bar, something else, like a literal dot. Now, a literal dot needs to be escaped. Otherwise, it represents any character, which would be a regression, a step back. But now notice what I've done. In parentheses, I'm telling re.search that those first few characters in your email address, that is your username, has to be a word character, like A through Z, uppercase or lowercase, or 0 through 9, or an underscore, or a literal dot. We could do this differently too. I could get rid of the parentheses and the or, and I could just use a set of characters. I could again manually say A through Z, 0 through 9, underscore, and then I could do a literal dot with a backslash period. And now I technically don't even need the uppercase because I'm already telling the computer to ignore case. I can just pick one or the other. Which one is better is really up to you. Whichever one you think is more readable would generally be the better design. All right, let me propose that I rewind this in time to where we left off, which was here. And let me propose that there are indeed still limitations of this solution, not just with the username, not just with the domain name. We're still being a little too restrictive. So would you like to see the official regular expression that at least browsers use nowadays whenever you type in an email address to a web form, and the web form, the browser, tells you yes or no, your email address is syntactically valid? Ready? Ready? Here is, and this isn't even officially the right regular expression. It's a simplified version that browsers use because it catches most mistakes, but not all. Here we go. This is the regular expression for a valid email address, at least as browsers nowadays implement them. Now, it's crazy cryptic at first glance, but note, and it's wrapping onto many lines, but it's just one pattern. But just notice the now familiar symbols. There is the caret symbol at the very top. There is the $sign at the very end. There is a square bracket over here, and then some of these ranges plus other characters. Turns out you don't normally see these characters in email addresses. It looks like you're swearing at someone in their username, but they're valid characters. They're valid officially. That doesn't mean that Gmail is going to allow you to put $signs and other punctuation in your username, but officially some servers might allow that. So if you really want to validate a user's email address, you would actually come up with or copy paste something like this. But honestly, this looks so cryptic, and if you were to type it out manually, you are so likely to make a mistake. What's the better solution here instead? This is where, per past weeks, libraries are your friend. Surely someone else on the internet, a programmer more experienced than you even, has come up with code that validates email addresses properly using this regular expression or even something more sophisticated than that. So generally, if the problem at hand is to validate input that is pretty conventional, an email address, a URL, something where there's an official definition that's independent of you yourself, find a popular library that you're comfortable using and use it in your code to validate email addresses. This is not a wheel necessarily that you yourself should invent. We've used email addresses, though, to iteratively start from something simple, too simple, and build on top of that. So you could certainly imagine using regular expressions still to validate things that aren't email addresses, but are data that are important to you. So we at least now have these building blocks. Now, besides the regular expressions themselves,